Whoa, hold it right there, pal. No running in my mall.
Federal agent, get out of the way. Right now, we don't have enough time.
You print that at home? Looks fake. You're not going anywhere until I say so.
You're obstructing a federal investigation. Move.
I said stay put. You are not going anywhere.
The air inside the massive shopping center was cold and smelled like pretzels and floor wax as Jakes and Philip moved through the crowd with a speed that was fast but careful so they would not knock over any children or old people. Jakes was walking a few steps ahead with his eyes locked tight on a man in a gray jacket who was about 50 feet away and moving toward the exit doors with a backpack that contained something very stolen and very dangerous. Philip was right behind Jakes and was checking the left and right sides to make sure the man in the gray jacket did not have any friends hiding in the clothing stores or the food court waiting to ambush them. They were close to finishing a job that had taken them weeks of watching and waiting and sitting in cars and drinking cold coffee. The suspect was right there in front of them, and he had no idea that two of the best FBI agents were about to grab him and put him in handcuffs before he could hurt anyone else. Before we dive deeper into this intense chase, I want to know where you are watching this story from right now. Please go ahead and drop your city or country in the comment section below so we can see how far this story is traveling. The suspect in the gray jacket took a quick look behind him, and that was when Jakes knew they had to speed up because the man had seen them and was starting to walk much faster toward the glass doors that led to the parking lot. Jakes signaled to Philip with a small wave of his hand, which meant they needed to close the gap immediately before the man could get into a car and vanish into the traffic of the city. They were both dressed in regular street clothes like jeans and hoodies, so they would blend in with the shoppers, but they moved with a purpose and a sharpness that showed they were not there to buy sneakers or eat pizza. Jakes felt his heart beating in a steady rhythm as he prepared his legs to sprint the final distance and tackle the man before he reached the automatic doors. Just as Jakes was about to break into a full run to catch the man, a figure stepped out from behind a large potted plant and blocked the path with his arms spread wide like a human gate. It was a security guard named Micky who was wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too tight and a belt that had way too many keys and flashlights hanging from it for a job inside a safe mall. Micky was a white man with a face that looked like he had just eaten a lemon, and he stood firmly in front of Jakes and Philip with a look of absolute authority that he did not actually possess. Jakes tried to sidestep to the right so he could keep moving toward the suspect who was now getting further and further away, but Micky moved to the right as well and blocked him again. The suspect in the gray jacket was now pushing past a family with a stroller and was only 20 feet away from the exit doors, while Jakes was stuck standing still in front of a mall cop who looked like he was enjoying this moment way too much. Jakes did not have time for a conversation or a debate because every second that ticked by was a second that the criminal was using to escape justice. Jakes reached into his pocket smoothly and pulled out his leather wallet to flip it open and reveal the shiny gold badge that said Federal Bureau of Investigation in big, bold letters. He held it up right in front of Micky's face so the guard could see it clearly and understand that they were on official business and needed to pass immediately. Usually when people see that gold badge, they step aside instantly and ask how they can help, or they just get out of the way because they know that FBI agents do not run through malls for no reason. But Micky did not step aside, and instead he leaned in closer to the badge and squinted his eyes as if he was trying to read the tiny writing on the bottom, or as if he thought it was a toy badge from a cereal box. The suspect in the background was now looking back and smiling because he saw that the 2 men chasing him had been stopped by a security guard, and he knew he had a chance to get away. Philip stepped up beside Jakes and tried to explain that they were in a pursuit and that the man getting away was a criminal who needed to be caught right now. Micky shook his head slowly and put his hand on his belt near his radio while he looked Jakes up and down with a nasty look that made it very clear he did not believe they were agents. He started asking questions that made no sense for the situation, like asking them why they were running inside the mall and why they were dressed like that if they were supposedly important police officers. He told them that running was against the safety rules of the shopping center and that he did not care what kinds of badge they had because in this building, he was the one in charge of safety. It was the kind of thing that makes your blood boil because you can tell when someone is just doing their job and when someone is using their small amount of power to be mean to people they do not like. Jakes took a deep breath and tried to move around Micky again, but the guard stepped in front of him and actually put a hand on Jakes' chest to push him back, which is something you should never do to a federal agent. Micky said loudly that they needed to calm down and stop acting like thugs before he called the real police to come and take them away to jail for disturbing the peace. The word he used and the way he said it carried a heavy weight that hung in the air and made Jakes realize that this man was not stopping them because of safety rules, but because he saw two black men running and decided they were the problem. The suspect was now at the glass doors, and he pushed them open and stepped out into the bright sunlight of the afternoon. Do you think Micky would have stopped them if they looked different? Type yes or no in the comments if you think you know why he really did this. Philip pointed at the door and told Micky that he was letting a felon escape and that this was obstruction of justice, which is a very serious crime that can get a person in a lot of trouble. Micky laughed a short and dry laugh and said that he knew a fake badge when he saw one and that he was not going to let a couple of guys run wild in his mall and scare the customers. He demanded that they hand over their identification cards so he could take a picture of them and report them to the mall management for banning. While Micky was talking about bans and rules and regulations, the suspect in the gray jacket walked calmly to a silver sedan that was waiting at the curb and opened the back door. Jakes watched helplessly over Micky's shoulder as the car drove away slowly and disappeared around the corner of the building and out of sight forever. The mission was a total failure, and all the work they had done for weeks was wasted because a security guard wanted to feel powerful for 5 minutes. Jakes felt a fire in his chest, but he knew that if he got angry or shouted, it would only make things worse and give Micky exactly what he wanted. He slowly put his badge back into his pocket and looked Micky directly in the eyes with a calm stare that was much scarier than any yelling could ever be. Micky seemed to think he had won the argument because the troublemakers had stopped running and were now standing still in front of him. He smiled a smug little smile and pulled his radio off his belt to call his supervisor and brag about how he had stopped 2 suspicious men who were trying to cause a panic in the North Wing. He spoke into the radio loud enough for everyone around to hear and said he had the situation under control and that he needed backup to escort 2 individuals off the property. Jakes and Philip just stood there and waited because they knew that the game had changed, and now it was Micky who was in trouble, even though he did not know it yet. A few moments later, a man in a suit came jogging down the hallway looking very worried because he had heard the word FBI mentioned by some of the shoppers who were watching the scene unfold. This was the mall manager, and he looked at Micky and then he looked at Jakes and Philip, and he immediately knew that something was very wrong. Micky started talking fast and pointing fingers at Jakes and Philip, saying that they were aggressive and that they flashed a fake badge and that he saved the day by stopping them from chasing a customer. The manager looked at Jakes and asked quietly if he could see the credentials again because he wanted to be sure of who he was dealing with. Jakes took out the badge again and also pulled out his official photo ID card that had the holographic seal of the government on it. The manager looked at the badge and his face went completely pale as he realized that his employee had just physically stopped 2 federal agents from catching a criminal. He turned to Micky and asked him if he had really blocked these men, and Micky puffed out his chest and said yes, he did, because they looked like they were up to no good. The manager closed his eyes for a second like he had a headache and then told Micky to be quiet immediately because he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Philip spoke up then and told the manager in a very clear voice that they had been in pursuit of a fugitive who was wanted for major crimes, and that because of the interference by his security guard, the suspect was now gone. He explained that Micky had refused to look at the badge and had used physical force to stop a federal investigation while making racially biased comments about their appearance. The manager looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole because he knew that this was a lawsuit waiting to happen and also a public relations nightmare. Micky started to argue back, saying that he was just following protocol and that they shouldn't have been running, but the manager shouted at him to stop talking right now. The manager apologized profusely to Jakes and Philip and asked if there was anything he could do to help them locate the suspect now that he was gone. Jakes shook his head and said it was too late because the car was long gone and they would have to start the investigation all over again from the beginning. He told the manager that what happened here was unacceptable and that Micky was a liability who was unable to do his job correctly or treat people with respect. Micky looked confused because he still thought he was the hero who had protected the mall from bad guys. The manager turned to Micky and held out his hand and told him to give him the radio and the badge right now because he was relieved of his duties effective immediately. Micky's mouth dropped open and he asked what was happening and why he was being punished for doing his job. The manager told him that he was fired for gross misconduct and for endangering the public and for obstructing federal agents and for profiling customers based on how they looked. Micky tried to say that it wasn't fair and that he was just being careful, but the manager took the radio from his hands and pointed to the exit. It was a long walk for Micky as he had to leave the spot where he thought he was the king and walk past all the shoppers who had seen him being mean and were now watching him get fired. He looked at Jakes and Philip one last time and he didn't see anger in their faces anymore, but just pity because he was a small man who lost his job because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. Jakes and Philip watched him go and then they turned to each other and let out a long sigh because even though the bad guy got away and the guard got fired, it was still a bad day. They walked slowly toward the exit, not to chase anyone, but to go back to their car and call their boss to explain why the mission failed. As they walked out of the mall, the sun was starting to go down and the air was getting cooler and the city was getting louder with the rush hour traffic. They knew they would catch the guy eventually because they were good at what they did and they never gave up even when things went wrong. The silver sedan was gone and the trail was cold, but they had the license plate number memorized because Jakes never forgot a number he saw. They would go back to the office and run the plate and find out where the car was going and they would be there waiting next time. The drive back to the headquarters was quiet because both of them were thinking about how many times this kind of thing happened and how hard it was to do a job when people judged you before they even knew who you were. They stopped at a red light and Jakes looked at Philip and said that next time they would just have to run faster or maybe jump over the guard if he got in the way. Philip laughed for the first time that afternoon and said that he would pay money to see Jakes jump over a security guard. The light turned green and they drove on with a little bit of hope that tomorrow would be a better day and that the bad guy would make a mistake. Back at the mall, the manager was still apologizing to everyone who was near the incident and trying to make sure nobody posted a video of it on the internet. He knew that if the video got out, it would show exactly what happened and everyone would see that his employee was in the wrong. He walked back to his office and sat down in his chair and wiped the sweat from his forehead because he knew how close the mall had come to being in big trouble. He made a note to hire better people next time and to make sure they knew that a badge meant a badge and that judging people by their clothes was a quick way to lose a job. The story of the chase and the distraction and the escape would become a lesson for all the other agents in the bureau about how unpredictable the world can be. They would talk about it in the break room and shake their heads and say that you can plan for everything except for a person who refuses to listen. Jakes and Philip wrote their report that evening, and they detailed every second of the encounter with Micky and the loss of the suspect. They typed it all out in black and white so that it would be on record that they did their best, but were stopped by a force they could not control. But let's go back to the moment the car drove away because that is the part that hurts the most when you are working so hard for something. The feeling of seeing the taillights fade into the distance is a heavy feeling that sits in your stomach like a rock. It makes you question if you could have done something different, or if you should have pushed the guard harder, or if you should have shouted louder. But Jakes knew that if he had physically fought the guard, it would have been a disaster, and he would have been the one in trouble instead of Micky. He had to make a split-second decision to stay professional and follow the rules even when the other person was breaking them and being disrespectful. That is the hardest part of the job because you have to be the bigger person even when you are frustrated and angry and full of adrenaline. The discipline it takes to stand still while a criminal runs away is more than most people have, but Jakes had it and Philip had it too. That is why they were agents, and Micky was just a guy with a flashlight who didn't know how to treat people. The suspect in the gray jacket probably thought he was a genius for getting away, and he was probably laughing in the back of that car counting his luck. He didn't know that his face was now burned into the memory of two men who would not stop looking for him until they found him. He didn't know that by running away, he had only bought himself a little bit of time and that the net was closing in on him slowly but surely. The chase was not over. It was just paused for a moment while the obstacles were cleared away. When Jakes got home that night, he sat on his couch and looked at the wall and replayed the scene in his head over and over again. He thought about the look on Micky's face when he realized he was fired and the look on the manager's face when he saw the badge. It was a small justice in a day of injustice, but it was something to hold on to. He knew that Micky would wake up the next morning without a job and without a uniform, and maybe he would have time to think about why he did what he did. Maybe Micky would learn that respect is something you give to get, and that power is not about stopping people, but about helping them. Or maybe he would just be angry and blame everyone else for his problems, but that was not Jake's problem anymore. Jake's had a job to do and a suspect to catch, and he needed to rest so he could be ready for whatever happened tomorrow. He closed his eyes and let the noise of the city fade away and focused on the image of the silver sedan and the license plate number. The next morning, the sun came up just like it always does, and the city started to move again with people going to work and buses running and shops opening. Jakes met Philip at the office, and they drank their coffee and looked at the map on the wall where they had pinned the location of the mall. They drew a line from the mall to the highway and started to calculate where the car could have gone in the time since the escape. They were back in the game, and their minds were sharp, and they were not thinking about Micky anymore. The work of an agent is never done, and there is always another case and another chase and another suspect who thinks he is smarter than everyone else. But they also knew that there would always be people like Micky who would get in the way because of ignorance or prejudice or just plain stupidity. They had to be ready for the obstacles just as much as they were ready for the criminals, because the world is a messy place. They picked up their keys and their radios and their badges and walked out to the car to start the hunt again. Have you ever had someone stop you from doing something important just because they wouldn't listen? It is the most frustrating feeling in the world, but you have to keep going, just like Jakes and Philip did. The investigation led them to a warehouse on the other side of the city where the silver sedan had been spotted by a traffic camera later that evening. They drove there quietly and parked down the street so they wouldn't be seen by anyone watching from the windows. They watched the building for hours and saw men moving boxes and checking the doors and acting very nervous. It looked like the suspect had not gone very far and had gone to ground to hide until the heat died down. This time, there were no mall cops and no shoppers and no distractions to get in the way of the operation. Jakes and Philip called for backup, and soon there were other cars arriving silently and taking up positions around the warehouse. They were going to do this right, and they were going to make sure that nobody slipped out the back door or drove away in a sedan. They put on their tactical vests and checked their equipment and waited for the signal to move in. When the moment came, they moved as one unit and breached the doors with speed and precision that was unstoppable. The men inside were surprised and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go because every exit was covered by an agent. Jake saw the man in the gray jacket trying to climb out of a window, and he ran across the room and pulled him down before he could get halfway out. He put the handcuffs on him and told him that he was under arrest and that the running was over. The man looked at Jakes and recognized him from the mall, and he looked shocked that they had found him so quickly after he thought he had escaped. Jakes just smiled a little and told him that they never stopped looking and that a delay is not a defeat. They walked him out to the car and put him in the back seat, and this time there was no Micky to stop them and no questions about badges. The mission was finally complete, and the bad guy was off the streets and the stolen items were recovered. As they drove away from the warehouse, Philip turned to Jakes and asked if he wanted to go back to the mall and tell Micky that they caught the guy anyway. Jakes laughed and said that Micky was probably sitting at home looking for a new job and that he didn't need to know anything about their success. They had done their job, and that was enough satisfaction for them without needing to rub it in anyone's face. They were professionals, and they had higher standards than the people who tried to drag them down. The story of the dumb mall cop and the escaped suspect became a legend in the office that they told to the new rookies to teach them about patience. They would tell them that sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't the criminal with the gun, but the guard with the ego. They would teach them that staying calm is a superpower and that losing your temper is the quickest way to lose the game. And they would always end the story by saying that in the end, the good guys win if they just keep moving forward. Life moved on for Jakes and Philip, and they solved many more cases and caught many more bad guys in the years that followed. They never saw Micky again, and they never went back to that mall if they could avoid it because it brought back annoying memories. But they never forgot the lesson they learned that day about how fragile a mission can be and how quickly things can go wrong. It made them better agents and more careful planners and more patient men. The world is full of people who will try to stop you and stand in your way and tell you that you don't belong where you are. They will ask to see your badge, and they will question your clothes, and they will try to make you feel small. But if you know who you are and you know what you are doing, then you can just look past them and keep your eyes on the prize. You can be like Jakes and Philip and let your work speak for itself while the Mickeys of the world fade away into the background. So the next time you are in a rush and someone tries to block your path for no good reason, just remember this story. Remember that you have a goal and a destination and that nothing can stop you unless you let it. Take a deep breath and show your badge if you have to, and then keep moving toward the exit, because the suspect is getting away and you are the only one who can catch him. This is the end of the story of the two agents and the mall cop and the chase that went wrong before it went right. It is a story about duty and prejudice and the satisfaction of seeing justice done in the end. It reminds us that even when we stumble, we can get back up and finish the race if we have the will to do it. And it reminds us that being a mall cop is a serious job that should not be done by people who just want to boss others around. Thank you for watching this video and sticking with it all the way to the end of the chase and the capture. I hope you felt the frustration and the victory and that you were glued to the screen wondering what would happen next. Now you can go back to your day and watch out for any mall cops who look like they have too many keys on their belt. Stay safe and keep moving forward no matter who tries to stand in your way.